Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chief Architect Network Live. We are excited to be here again today for a great show. We're live on both LinkedIn and YouTube, so that's exciting. And before we jump in and get started and tell you about the guest that we have with us today, let's take a second to introduce ourselves. So I'm Brian Chambers, Chief Architect at Chick-fil-A, also a board member of the Chief Architect Network, which we'll tell you about in just a moment. With me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Grant Ecker. Grant, how's it going?
It's going great. Grant Ecker, I'm the chairman and founder of the Chief Architect Network, a career chief architect, most recently at Danaher and Walgreens Boots Alliance, where I'm back contracting today. And I also help to build the architecture practices at Medtronic and Lowe's Home Improvement. It's been a fun ride, and it's really great to be able to connect among peers and share our stories together.
Yeah, Grant. Well, speaking of that, for those who aren't familiar, tell us, what is the Chief Architect Network and how does one become a part of it?
So the Chief Architect Network is a group of peer chief architects managing Fortune 500 size practices. Our goals are really around maximizing the value of architecture practices through our network that helps us widen our perspectives, share our best practices, grow as leaders, develop our talent, and basically drive outcomes as a community. We're a community led, vendor neutral, and no cost peer network of chief architects. And you can join us actually by just going to chiefarchitectnetwork.com. We had a little bit of fun geeking out creating a new website, which is now out there. So if you're a chief architect, this sounds like you. Just jump in and apply. It's no cost. We're vendor neutral, and we're a 501c3 C6 nonprofit, which is a professional association.
That's awesome. I love it. And for those listening in, as you know, we're live, which one of the awesome bonuses of that is that you have the opportunity, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, to make comments and ask questions. So that's part of the fun here. We want you to engage with us. And we're excited about the topic we're going to discuss today and think it's going to be really relevant. So don't be shy, ask some questions, make some comments, and we'll present them to our guests. So I think that's it for housekeeping. So let's move along to our topic for the day. I am really excited about this. We're going to have Rhett Ferrin joining us today, currently at Align Org Solutions. And we had the privilege of spending some time with Rhett at our Chief Architect Network quarterly a couple of weeks ago, and he presented to us, and it was really an incredible experience. I learned a lot, and Rhett is coming from a different part of business, as we'll learn, but I was just really shocked at how many overlaps there were with things that we were thinking about in enterprise architecture and business architecture. So we invited him to come back and spend some time with us today, and we're really excited that he's here. So Grant, why don't you introduce Rhett and kick us off here?
Awesome. I'm going to bring Rhett onto the stage here as we welcome him and move us around a little bit. So we're positioned for the show today. There we go. So Rhett is an organizational design consultant that I actually had the privilege of working with at Lowe's Home Improvement, where he helped us redesign our IT organization from soup to nuts. It was absolutely amazing to watch how this process went, and I learned a ton working with him and his colleagues. We've stayed in touch, and one of the things that really struck me is the parallel that exists between enterprise architecture and the discipline of business architecture and organizational design and the disciplines that are there. So before we dig into the kind of story that we're going to be sharing together, Rhett, would you just mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grant. Thanks so much, Brian. I'm glad I didn't scare you off when I presented a couple of weeks ago, and that you're nice enough to invite me back. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Quick introduction. My name's Rhett Ferrin. I've been involved in organization design in various roles over the last decade and a half, as well as some operations experience. So worked with a high growth insurance brokerage as chief operations officer, helping to grow and expand that organization. And it's interesting, as an organization grows, the different growing pains that it has. You kind of build an architecture for it, and then as it grows, it breaks everything, and so you have to rebuild it. And so you kind of pass these growing pains or these hurdles as you grow. But excited to share my experience today, and hopefully it's helpful.
Awesome. Well, again, we invite folks to jump in with us, ask questions, and engage live. It's part of the fun. Actually, it's all the fun. Your questions really make this whole thing go. But as we do have a bit of a through line to share with you today, which we'll start our conversation with. So I'd love to just ask you, Rhett, to start off with just kind of helping us understand the role of strategic alignment in organizational design.
Yeah. Well, I'll back up just a little bit. You mentioned that we met for the first time over 10 years ago, which is funny that it took us more than 10 years to make the connection between organization design and IT architecture. And what really kicked this off was a couple of months ago, I was speaking with a friend over lunch. He's a senior architect at Lenovo. And I asked him, tell me a little bit about your role. What does a chief architect do? And he started telling me what it does. And he started using terms that I had no idea what he was talking about. He said things like domain-driven design and event-driven architecture, and I'm trying to be polite. So I'm like smiling, like pretending like I know what he's talking about. And I have no idea what he's talking about until it gets to Conway's Law. And Conway's Law was fascinating to me because he said the communication patterns that are established with a organization are reflected in its IT architecture and the structure of its product. And I said, whoa. Like, say that again. He said the communication and reporting patterns of an organization are reflected in the product that it creates. And I said, well, hold on. That sounds a lot like organization design. So if we're ever going to make a digital transformation or some type of change, there's always going to be a human element to it. And he said, yeah, you're exactly right. And so once he said that, then I started to reframe all of the phrases that he said. So the domain-driven design is just trying to get the work trying to get the tools as close to the work as possible, and the resources as close to the work as possible. And so organization designers would call that organizing rationale of how do we group work together, or event-driven architecture, right? Is what are the series of events that have to take place and what are the tools that support that? And we would call that, value process mapping, right? And like a RACI or a decision chart to say, who's involved, what decision rights do they have, what's kind of the cause and effect there. And so once he said that Conway's Law, it really reframed for me how similar IT architects are to organization designers, and how a lot of times we're using the same principles, but just calling it different things. We're using different words for the same principle. And so I reached out to a friend who's a chief architect at a Dynamics integrator shop, right? So they work with Microsoft Dynamics. And I was super excited because I just come off of this lunch with my friend at Lenovo, and I was trying to test this theory out of, the similarities between IT architects and org design. And I said, hey, I think you're really similar, right? I mean, if you're ever going to make a change like Microsoft Dynamics implementation, there's going to be a human element to it too. He said, yes, but the problem is the human element.
How is the challenge?
Right. He said the reason that's a problem is usually processes are somewhat broken, to some degree in any organization. And when you're doing an implementation, a common refrain they hear is, well, let's just move to the new let's just move to the new platform, and then we'll clean up all the processes once we're in the new platform. And when I heard that, I had to pause and like breathe deeply, right? Because if you move to the new platform, you're just, solidifying all of those broken processes, right? You're just writing them in stone, and then you have to basically implement the system for new processes. So that's design principle number one, is that there's always a human element to any type of organization or IT design or transformation. And then the second principle is that you always want to make sure that you take that human piece into account, because there's no technical solution that can overcome broken interpersonal dynamics.
Right.
There's no tool that you can create that will make people want to work together if they don't want to work together. So
that's slow for some of the architects in the back. There's no tool that will fix human dynamic issues. I think that's a really good nugget.
Sometimes, leaders try and compensate for those interpersonal dynamics with a new tool, right? But if sales and marketing don't want to talk to each other, it doesn't matter what tool you use, they're not going to use it. And so those were the two principles that I started to develop talking with some of these chief architects. Is there's always a human element. And so you can acknowledge it and plan for it, or you can ignore it at your own peril. And then the second one is really fixing the human elements first, fixing those interpersonal dynamics, and then having the technology support those, not trying to compensate or overcome those broken personal dynamics.
This is really great. We could probably just end the session right now, and people would have enough to go and work on acting on. But the show must go on. So, question for you. You've got a lot of people in the audience that are coming from an IT side, an architecture side, things like that. How often are you bumping into architects like in the work that you're doing? And do you feel like it would be beneficial for them to be in some of the conversations that you're having with business people and business leaders? What's that dynamic look like? And if they are not there, like, what are your thoughts about that?
That's a great call out. So I'm a big advocate for using a framework or an approach anytime there's a design, and it's a collaborative approach. So I'm a big advocate of having, who are your top 10 to 20 leaders in an area. Sometimes that's the top of the organization, right? Sometimes that's the CEO and their direct reports. Or if I'm focused on just a IT organization, right? Maybe that's the CTO and his or her direct reports. So Grant and I actually met at Lowe's Home Improvement, and I was doing a lot of work with the IT organization. And so we had these design sessions where we would get the top 10 to 20 leaders in a room and help them make the trade-offs needed to align to certain choices or outcomes that they wanted to have. Because there's, going back to that human element, there may be the perfect strategy out there, but if nobody's bought in to that strategy, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So that's why I advocate for like a collaborative, co-creative approach to say, hey, let's work with the people that are going to be implementing this solution. Let's address all of their concerns. Let's resolve all of the trade-offs and all of the conflicts. So that way, leaving that design session, and it doesn't need to be long, a lot of these design sessions are a week, 3 or 4 days, but they leave that session being champions and advocates for the new change and the new direction versus resistant, because you've addressed all of their concerns, or at least 80% of the concerns right there in the room. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're called in to help implement a lot of strategies that some of the big four consulting firms come in. They come in, they work with a small group of leaders. They say, here's your menu item of, ideal organizations. Pick the one that works for you and then implement. That's 80% of the work. All you have to do is implement, and that's only 20% of the work. So once you have the answer, it's easy from there. And what we found is it's probably flipped. Understanding the org chart is probably 20%, and then really getting people bought in and that change management piece, it can be 80%. So we work with IT organizations a lot. I think the role of an IT architect is incredibly valuable because they bring that expertise to the table, understanding where the pitfalls are, where the resistance is going to be, what trade-offs need to happen in order to deliver a great strategy. So to answer your question, Brian, we work with IT organizations a lot, and if we would never do a design without them, but if we did, it would be pretty detrimental because we'd miss so much.
I'm going to come to Alexander's question here in a moment. Actually, let's jump to that first. So Alexander mentions that as you reference Conway's law, do you have any thoughts on the principle described by team topology?
I'm blanking a little bit on team topologies, but one article that comes to mind is one I read recently in the First Round review. So there's a venture capital fund called First Round, and they have their magazine, kind of like Harvard Business Review. And the author his name is Nan Liu. If you look him up, Nan Liu, he's a lead. He's a product lead at a company called Linear. And before he was a product head, he advised and consulted with hundreds of startups. And what he found was the organization structure should reflect the product. And he said, kind of what we were talking about with Conway's life. And he took it a step further. He said, you actually ship your organization chart, right? Like you ship the result of all of these trade-offs that you've had. It's in the product, but you ship your org chart. Meaning, if you're org chart doesn't work together, chances are pretty good that certain elements of your product aren't going to work together very well either. And so he used the analogy of a tomato. It's not exactly topology, but he used the example of a tomato where you go to the grocery store and you see all of these beautiful symmetrical tomatoes. But for an org chart, he says that should raise suspicion, because if your org chart is perfectly symmetrical, all of your teams are the same size, you're probably allocating resources equally as well, which means if you're equally distributing the resources, you're not distinct or unique in any particular way, in a way that's going to stand out for your customers, right? Why would a customer choose you if you're not the fastest, if you're not the best, if you're not the most at any certain element? You're going to lose your distinctive advantage. And so he advocates that org charts should look like heirloom tomatoes. If you've ever been to a farmer's market, right, and you see these, big, beautiful tomatoes, but they're all lumpy, right? They're not like the, manufactured tomatoes that we see at the grocery store. And so he said, if you've got a distinct advantage or a distinct feature to your product, you're probably going to have more resources there. You're going to have a bulge in your org chart where it might be a little bit more streamlined in other areas of the org chart. So is that close, or is there a little bit more that you wanted to dive down with topologies?
I think you hit it. I think you hit it very well. And I want to bridge us to another thing that really fascinates me, and I love how this ties our worlds together. So there's a quote that you've said, which is basically organizations are perfectly executed to execute on the results they're already getting, right?
Yeah.
Can you just riff on that quote for a little bit with me?
Yeah. I'd tweak it a little bit. I'd say your organization is perfectly designed to get the results you're currently getting.
Thank you. I mixed it up.
You're good.
That's it.
And sometimes I say that and people are like, well, what if we don't like the results? And that's a separate topic, right? Whether you like those results or not is a separate issue, but your current organization is perfectly designed to get those results. And so when you think about it that way, you start to think about systems and say, all right, this result is just the output of a system that I've created. And if I want to change the result, I need to change the system that's operating. There's another principle that I learned from my mentor, and he said, when the majority is acting, the system is dictating. So if you have a bunch of salespeople acting in a certain way, it's probably not the exception, right? There's a story where a CEO is frustrated, and he says, our customer service people just don't care about the customer. And the question he posed to him was, how is it possible that you've selected just people that don't care about the customer, right? Have you somehow screened out all the people that don't care about the customer? Or is it something in your systems, something in your processes, or some conflict of incentives that's resulting in this behavior? And so if you think about systems, and if you think we want to change the results, maybe that's a target. We want to increase sales by 20%. Or we want to reduce costs by 20%. Thinking back through to say, all right, what tweaks can we change to the system to change the result? Generally makes more of an impact. One example I'll share quickly. I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but I was doing some work for a advertising agency in New York, right? And so they're pretty big. Did about 500 million in revenue each year. They were growing. The CEO and founder had just stepped down, so they were at this point of transition. Luckily, I wasn't doing the design. I was there in a different role, because this is kind of a cautionary tale. But the new CEO was there. They were backed by private equity, and they had just moved from one business unit to 3. And over the last 6 months, they found all of these weird unintended consequences where instead of collaborating to sell more and cross-selling to grow the business, people became really, really territorial. And the 3 business units was designed to increase accountability to drive sales. But what happened was it meant I couldn't help you on a cross-functional deal, right? Anytime I helped you on your deal, it meant that I wasn't getting closer to my targets, and I would get dinged for my performance. And so the CEO thought through this, and he said, all right, well, what are we going to do to fix this. I also had these big growth targets because we had this PE funding. And so his solution was to divide the company further into 6 business units, to go from 3 units to 6 units. And watching this as a bystander was almost like watching like a car crash in slow motion, because the exact actions that they were taking to hopefully resolve these issues were going to exponentially complicate the scenario. If they were having a problem tracking revenue with 3 units, it was going to be a nightmare with 6. And that was the biggest complaint. People were saying they spent 30% of their time trying to resolve these revenue recognition issues, and it was just going to get way worse with 6. And so the architecture, I feel like, would be impacted by that. If you have to do reporting systems to support 3 business units and now support 6, it just becomes that much more complicated. So really using the right tools to solve the right problem is important in terms of changing results.
That's great. Maybe can you give us a little peek under the covers? Like, imagine you're showing up at a new client and you're kind of looking around. Like, what's the first thing or the most important thing that you think you end up looking at? Like, is it stuff like, what is their strategy right now? Or what are the goals? Or what different results do they want? Or are you looking at culture? Or like, how are you kind of deciding what actually has the biggest impact and where to kind of focus your energy as you arrive on the scene?
That's a great point. Like I said, I'm a big advocate for frameworks, and there's a bunch of frameworks out there. If I could share, but I won't. But if you Google Jay Galbraith, he's one of the founding fathers. He had a STAR model, and it has 5 different areas that he looks at. McKinsey has a model. It's like the 7 S's or 9 golden rules of something, because organizations are kind of like puzzles. I was just watching Jimmy Fallon the other day, and he had the pommel horse guy on his show. If you've ever if you've been watching the Olympics, I've been watching the Olympics. It's been fun.
Yeah.
And that Steven Nodirski or something. I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong. Super cool guy. Does the pommel horse. Does an amazing job. Won an Olympic medal. But on Jimmy Fallon's show, he's got the Rubik's Cube, and he's flying through the Rubik's Cube. And it's not because he's some type of genius. It's because he uses a framework to streamline his decision processes. And so just like a doctor, when you go to the doctor, they use a diagnostic framework to say, okay, where does it hurt? Is it the left side of your body, the right side of your body, the top side of your body, the bottom side of your body, to try and pinpoint where the issues are. And so similar with an organization, we say, all right, well, what's our objective, right? What's our goal? Is it a pain point, or is it our results, right? Are we trying to fix something that's broken, or are we trying to attain a goal that we haven't achieved yet? And then there's usually 3 buckets. It's usually, is this a systemic issue that's, prevalent throughout the entire organization? Is this a group issue? Maybe it's confined to just one certain group. Or is this an individual issue, right? Is there a leader or a certain, outspoken person that's impacting this, right? And so there's certain questions that we can ask to diagnose where in the organization to start. And then once we're there, we know what the objective is. We know kind of where to focus our energies. Then we start with, what's our strategy to get there? What are the capabilities needed? And then how are we doing with those capabilities? Some of those capabilities we have, some of those capabilities we don't have, right? And so let's do red, yellow, green to identify where we're at with those capabilities. And then what's the work needed to do that? After the work, then we get into people, which you'll notice is kind of flip-flopped from the way a lot of organizations do it. A lot of times they start with people to say, who has got some availability on their plate, who needs a stretch assignment, you just put some work on this person's plate where it may not be relevant to any of the other work that's on there. So to go back to your question, I don't want to digress too far, but to get back to your question, yes, there is a framework. We want to identify, is it a pain point or a results issue? Where in the organization is the issue? And then once we identify where, then we go through a series of questions to identify what needs to change.
I just wanted to quickly call out, we've got Linda's comments here below. So she leads the Twin Cities Business Architecture Forum, which is the largest gathering of business architects, actually globally. It just happens to be in the Twin Cities. She started the group about 14 years ago. And what's great is that discipline of business architecture and the discipline of org design, that's just so much overlap. So it's just awesome. She's here today.
That's
and
awesome.
able to share her thoughts. So Linda, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Linda. And again, I'm a slow learner, right? It took me 10 years working with grants to finally make this connection. So if we can help people streamline and not take 10 years to make that connection, I think we're doing good things.
Another interesting one that you just hit a second ago, Rhett, was the sort of flip-flop of the process. And that's something we talk about a lot in architecture, is not like leading with technology. You're actually like looking for, business needs and outcomes first. Technology is about enabling those things. And like an anti-pattern in our industry would be showing up with technology and just trying to, fit it to a problem, trying to find a reason to use it, or being fixated on it. So another really interesting like tie-in between the two.
Oh, I think that's where benchmarking can get people in trouble, right? If we say, "Oh, our competitors are using X technology," I had the fortunate or unfortunate experience of implementing a Salesforce implementation, and largely the rationale was, well, our competitors use it. If we want to get similar results to them, let's use Salesforce as well. And so we took out the CRM that was mostly working to implement it with Salesforce, which wasn't working at all. On the foundation of, well, this must be the tool, this must be the silver bullet, and rarely is it the silver bullet. So I like how you said that is technology can enable the processes, but really getting clear on what's the objective first, what are the capabilities, and then build the tool to support that.
Yeah, maybe a quick follow-up for you. I'm sure a lot of us see this scenario, and I'm curious if you do too. Do you run into places in organizations where on the people side, there's sort of like sacred cows, so to speak, like we've always done it this way, or no, we can't change that, or things like that? And if so, how do you address those when that's maybe key to getting the results that are needed in the organization?
That's a great call out. And it goes back to that change management aspect, right? My approach is very much of a co-creation, right? It's a process methodology. It's not a, here's the answer, go ahead and execute. For that exact same reason, right? There's going to be so much resistance. And you said sacred cows. People will operate based on their rationale or their experience. And so using a group to make decisions and make those trade-offs can help expose, or not expose, but reveal that rationale and that logic, right? Because they may be saying, we've always done it this way because, fill in the blank, right? And so trying to get that rationale visible, I call it putting it on the wall, right? So if you've got a group of people and you're putting it on a sticky note on the wall, you're saying, all right, this is our assumption that if we do this, we get this result. Well, if we want to change the result, we need to change the system. And so understanding what is that sacred cow, what are we trying to get from that sacred cow, or what trade-off can happen, and resolving that in the room. And it may take a few iterations. That's why it's called organization design, right? Because you're prototyping and iterating what a potential design or a solution would look like. It does take humility on the side of the team members, right? To be open-minded, to say, okay, what does this look like? And what I try to do is I try to use the strategy as the referee. That's why I start with the strategy, to say, where are we trying to get to? And then what trade-offs are in line and get us closer to that strategy, and which ones take us apart. So if it's a sacred cow that maybe doesn't even impact the strategy, I may just parking lot that to be like, okay, great, we won't touch that. That's off limits, and just make that out of scope, right? If there's no reason to address it, why force it? In other ways, maybe it does impact the strategy, and maybe it's at direct odds with the strategy. And so I'd say, all right, team, let's walk through this. And we may take half an hour or an hour to talk through different alternatives and different ways to approach the issue. Maybe preserving the same outputs that they want to preserve, but changing some of the approach.
This is awesome. I had a question pop in from Anand around herding cows. Is it best practice to get the chief herder to champion it? And while you're thinking of your answer, I'll say, I've watched you in action with the parking lot. That is a very good tool, right? Like, okay, we wrote it down so you can let go of that and we can focus back on getting our org alignment back in place. What are your thoughts on the chief herder?
It's interesting. One of two things I've seen happen. Some of your chief herders, if you can win them over, become your biggest advocates.
Yep.
Which is huge, right? So we were doing a design with a manufacturing firm, And one of the leaders was in charge of half of the organization, right? So he's a very influential person. And we were separating, some of the profit and loss responsibilities, right? We were separating some of the marketing responsibilities from some of the engineering responsibilities, and it was a big impact to his organization. And he was pretty quiet and reserved throughout the design. But then, we got to hear other people's input, and we, debated, the pros and cons of either one. And eventually, over 2 or 3 hours, he came around and he said, okay, I can see the logic to where if we remove some of these marketing type activities from the P&L owner, they can actually focus on getting the business done versus and relying on a marketing person to support them in their objectives rather than having their focus diverted, trying to do all the marketing and the other one. Now that was the best case scenario. The other path that I've seen is if they're just like stuck on this sacred cow, and the whole group is kind of moving past them to the new strategy. Sometimes I'll pull the leader aside and say, "Hey, we're seeing this behavior. Is this something that we need to acknowledge, or can we move forward?" Right? And sometimes it's the business leader's call to say, "All right, I'll deal with that individually because we're moving in the right direction, and we just have to address that offline." So that happens, 20% of the time. We try to avoid it, but sometimes you just have to carve that out.
Very fair. Just a quick call out. If you're a Chief Architect Network member, we could try to use that last few minutes with you on camera where you'd like to join us. The link is in your invite. Please free to join us as interested. And as we kind of step into kind of the closing pieces of this, I'd love to kind of collect, right, what your advice is, right, as we start to look at organizational design. I love how at the beginning you talked about how companies come in and try to help with just the structure. It's the same thing you see leaders do, right? Just jump straight to the answer. It reminds me a ton of jumping straight to the architecture, straight to the solution design, as opposed to understanding your requirements. And I'm curious, kind of, does that resonate, one? And two, kind of what other closing comments might you share?
Yeah. I think in closing, leading with the strategy is the most important piece. So that way everybody's aligned on, what's the direction that we're trying to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And then involving the right number of people, right? You don't want to have too few to where it feels like this change is being crammed down my throat. You don't want to have too many to where it's like, designed by committee. We found that like 10 to 20 range is enough to get the, requisite insights and trade-off decisions. And then, you're getting a head start on that change management piece by having the champions. And then the second piece I'd say is use a framework. McKinsey did a study, and they have like these 9 golden rules of org design. And they tracked 1,000 different companies that did org design. And they said, even if you just implement one of these golden rules, your likelihood of success increases dramatically, right? If you apply 2 of these rules, it increases even more, right? And if you implement all 9, it's like an 88% chance of success that you'll implement the change and you'll get the results from the change that you were shooting for. So find a methodology, use a methodology and a framework. It'll speed up the process and increase your chances of success.
Awesome. Well, I can invite one of our special guests, one of our network members, Laura. I'd love to bring you on with us and see what questions you might have. Hey, Laura, you're on mute, but then quickly say who you are first, and then let's hear your question or comment.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm just always taken away with Rhett's conversation. That I think the alignment of enterprise business architecture and organizational design, it's like a marriage that no one talks about. Like, there's so many similarities. And
Right.
So thank you once again for your time and your insight. And thank you, Grant, and thank you, Brian, for bringing this into the surface. Like, I feel like we could do a whole workshop or a whole conference on this and like really have a marriage to disciplines, the art and the science of it. There's so many similarities. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Amazing. Well, that was super meaningful. Thanks for joining us, Laura. Well, I think we're kind of at a good point. Brian, any thoughts from you as we wrap?
No, this has been really great, Rhett. I learned a lot, and I think there's a lot to think about. And I just love your counsel to all of us who are chief architects to think about how to engage and how to make this fit happen. I think we probably all have a lot of work to do. This maybe is a little bit of a frontier in our discipline to sort of like sit at the intersection of these two things. But I think that's an exciting spot to be in, that some of the things that are unique value adds that architects, chief architects can bring to their organizations could be like amplified by a closer relationship here. Not taking over this stuff because it's not our sweet spot, but that partnership opportunity with these types of things that happen in organizations. Because back to what you said at the very beginning, like Conway's Law, the systems and the landscape really of people, process, technology, data are probably going to be largely dictated at times by how the organization looks. And yeah, it's going to get the results it's been designed to produce, or sort of. But we really appreciate your time today. This has been really awesome. Grant, any final thoughts from you?
Just again, I just appreciate the adjacent disciplines, organizational design, coaching, mentoring, some of the transformation leadership that we work with digital partners in. I think architecture is about connecting domains and connecting folks to drive enterprise outcomes, whether that's org design, whether that's the approach and the strategy to transform our businesses together. It starts with business architecture. It goes into information, solution, technical, security architecture. And I just love all of those interdisciplinary things that we have. So Rhett, thank you so much for stepping into the space that's adjacent to yours to learn about our world so we can learn about yours. And I just have a ton of appreciation for what you do and the skills that you bring. Because honestly, it's very similar, outcome-centric, working backwards, ensuring that we're aligning for different results than we're achieving today.
Absolutely.
I encourage everyone to reach out to Rhett if you'd like to connect, if you have questions, if you'd like him to speak with your organizations. He's one of the best that I've seen. Rhett, how would people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is the best way. Rhett Ferrin. Rhett's not a super common name, so connect with me on LinkedIn. That was really my goal today, is giving your audience some tools to address some of the human aspects of your transformations. Like anytime you're trying to implement that, I was really hoping to give you some tools, because I think that there's an understanding that the human element needs to happen, but you're so talented at the technology part. I worry that there's this feeling of, well, we just use the technology to cover it, when you don't need to stretch it that far, right? If you have a handful of tools on the human side, they can work together and really be productive. And like we've talked about today, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's so many similarities that really are complementary to each other. They really work together.
Amazing. Well, thanks again. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. And if you're a chief architect, consider joining us at chiefarchitectnetwork.com. Take care, everybody. And thanks again for a fantastic show.
See you next time.
Thanks so much.
See you next time.
Bye.